So this is the last talk on GED Social Studies history, and it's looking at history, I say here of the USA, but really I mean of the world more post-2000. My last talk, the talk from the end of World War II up until 2000 was very long. This talk is much shorter, and you're very unlikely to be asked questions in this area. It's possible, so we must cover it. But I'm really going to highlight the issues of the world post-2000. After the Second World War, the big issue for the US was the Cold War with Russia, the fight between capitalism and communism, a fight which, in the end, the US won. But post-2000, there were new problems and also the resurfacing of old problems. So one new problem was Al-Qaeda, Islamic extremism. But actually this new problem is based on the old problem from the creation of Israel and from the US getting over-involved in the Islamic world. On the September the 11th, 2001, sometimes called 9/11, there was a major terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. A terrorist group called Al-Qaeda hijacked a number of airlines in the US. The pilots of those airlines were forced to fly the planes, not to their airport destinations, but into things, including the World Trade Center in New York, with enormous loss of life. This terrorist attack on the World Trade Center led to America becoming really very aggressive in the Middle East. It led to their actions in Afghanistan against the Taliban and in Iraq with the removal of Saddam Hussein. And the fight with Islamic extremism continues today. The second change, the rise of China. America's fight to be the world power was with Russia through much of the second half of the 20th century. But what we found since 2000 was the rise of China as an economy. The population of China is about 4 times that of the USA. China lived for much of the second half of the 20th century as a fairly closed economy. But as China became more of an exporter, became better at producing technology of its own, and as the Chinese economy grew and grew, it became much more of a threat to the USA and the US's position as the world superpower. And this threat continues today. Technology. Technology is something which has changed enormously over the last 20 years. We have had a major technological revolution. People all have smartphones. People all use the internet. We now have the rise of things like AI and ChatGPT. And these are all changing the life for immeasurably from the sort of life that people led 20 or 30 years ago. Climate change is perhaps the biggest threat to the world today, economies around the world have grown from fossil fuels, the burning of oil and coal. And we have learned that this use of fossil fuels and the carbon dioxide that is produced as a result of fossil fuels is creating huge climate change problems. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is warming the Earth, and the warming of the Earth threatens our very existence. Pollution is also a major problem. Waste. There is now said to be more waste in the sea than fish. Many of the developed Western economies have grown and become developed through use of fossil fuels in the past. They are learning how to live in a more carbon neutral economy. But some of the developing economies, like India, China, and other Southeast Asian economies, are continuing to burn fossil fuels at dramatic amounts. So dramatic that unless we can change the way we live, it threatens the very existence to the world. This is a major threat to the world today, and countries around the world are trying to discuss ways to reduce this threat with, I'm afraid to say so far, very mixed results. Immigration. There is mass movements of people from poor areas threatened with climate change, causing drought, famine, to try to move to more developed areas. Mass immigration around the world. In America, there is mass immigration from South and Central America into the US, and the US are building barricades and all systems possible to try to prevent this immigration flood into their country. In Europe too, we are faced with huge amounts of immigration, people moving from the Middle East and Asia for economic reasons, but also for political reasons, to escape from war. We are seeing huge migration from Africa into Europe, and European countries are trying to do all they can to stop the migration. Finally, Russia. With the end of the Soviet Union, one thought that the war between capitalism and communism was finished. But very sadly, the Cold War with Russia has restarted again. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has set off a new Cold War. We are seeing hundreds of thousands of people dying in Ukraine as Russia fights to establish control over the country, and as the West supports the Ukrainian government with money and weapons in a pattern of the Cold War that we saw too often in the 60s and 70s. This brings us to the end of the history part of GED. There are no questions at the end of this part. Actually, when I went through lists of questions in GED, there are very few questions on US history since 2000. You may see something about 9/11. You could see something on any of these subjects, but this is not an area where so far I've seen an awful lot.